August 7th, 1964. First Union Missionary Baptist Church, Meridian, Mississippi. The next day I went to James Chaney's funeral. Dave Dennis, co-director of COFO, delivered the eulogy. As I stand here, I not only blame the people who pulled the trigger or did the beating or dug the hole with a shovel. I blame the people in Washington, D.C., and on down in the state of Mississippi for what happened just as much as I blame those who pulled the trigger. You see, I know what's going to happen. I feel that even if they find the people who killed those guys in the summertime, you got to come back to the state of Mississippi and have a jury. And all their cousins, their aunts, their uncles, and I know what they're going to say. Not guilty, because no one saw them pull the trigger. I'm tired of that. See, another thing that makes me even tireder, though, is that we, as a people here in this state and the country, are allowing this to continue to happen. Each and every one of us, as individuals, is going to have to take it upon ourselves to become leaders in our community, block by block, house by house, city by city, county by county, state by state, through this entire country, taking our Black brothers by the hand, holding our hands up high, telling them that if they're not ready for us, too bad, baby, because we're coming anyway. You see, the best thing that we can do for Mr. Chaney, for Mickey Schwerner, for Andrew Goodman, is to stand up and demand our rights. All these people who aren't registered voters should be in line in the morning demanding to become a registered voter. Demand. Say, baby, I'm here. Don't bow down anymore. Hold your heads up. We want our freedom now. I don't want to go to another memorial. I'm tired of funerals. Tired of it. We got to stand up. July 14th, 1964, Daly City, California. At the 1964 Republican National Convention, New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller tried to sway the party of Lincoln to stand up to the growing influence of conservative extremists. It is essential that this convention repudiate, here and now, any doctrine, militant, minority, whether communist, Ku Klux Klan, or Bircher, which would subvert this party to purposes alien to the very basic tenets which gave this party birth. Precisely 1 year ago today, on July 14th, 1963, I issued a statement wherein I warned that the Republican Party is in real danger of subversion by a radical, well-financed, and highly disciplined minority. At the time, I pointed out that the purposes of this minority were wholly alien to the sound and honest conservatism that has firmly based the Republican Party in the best of centuries' traditions. Boo! Wholly alien to the sound and honest Republican liberalism that has kept the party abreast of human needs in a changing world. Boo! Boo! Wholly alien to the broad middle course that accommodates the mainstream of Republican principles. Boo! 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 Our sole concern must be the future well-being of America and a freedom and respect for human dignity, the preservation and enhancement of these principles upon which this nation has achieved its greatness. Boo! 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 The Republican Party nominated Barry Goldwater, a senator from Arizona who had voted against the Civil Rights Act, for president. Those who seek absolute power, even though they seek it to do what they regard as good, are simply demanding the right to enforce their own version of heaven on earth. And let me remind you, They are the very ones who create the most hellish tyrannies. Absolute power does corrupt, and those who seek it must be suspect and must be opposed. Their mistaken course stems from false notions of equality, ladies and gentlemen. Equality, rightly understood as our founding fathers understood it, leads to liberty and to the emancipation of creative differences. Wrongly understood, it has been so tragically in our time, it leads first to conformity and then to despotism. Goldwater's accepted speech signaled a dangerous shift in the Republican Party. I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. And let me remind you also that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. It was in this shadow that President Johnson mapped his path to re-election. August 14th, 1964. We better just really try to see if the Negroes didn't realize that they've got the president, they've got the vice president. They'll have the government for 4 years. That will be fair and just with them. And why in the living hell do they want to hand shovel 15 states to Goldwater? Do you see any good that can come from it? Can it get us any votes? Anywhere? Not one damn bit of good. Not one bit. We're just not dealing with what I call emotionally stable people on this, Mr. President. A week before we were set to arrive in Atlantic City, President Johnson called Senator Hubert Humphrey of Minnesota to discuss our actions and enlist Humphrey's support in stopping us. Passed over by President Kennedy as a running mate, Senator Humphrey had long held ambitions for the presidency. Still undecided, President Johnson was to announce his running mate in a matter of days at the Democratic National Convention. Now, if we, on the other hand, have a fight on this and win, and we support Mississippi, it seems to me that all the poor Negroes in Atlanta and Harlem will say, well, Johnson and Humphrey, look at them. They stood up for Mississippi at the convention, so we haven't got much choice between Goldwater and him. And so we just won't vote. Well, we've got to settle it before the convention. I know that. August 21st, 1964. The delegates arrived by bus at the Old Gem Hotel in Atlantic City. They were a sight to behold, the epitome of American democracy. Dr. King, myself, and many others would come along to support the delegates, to stage rallies, talk to the press, and show the world what we stood for. We even brought a burned out car to represent the one driven by Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney. Meanwhile, Joan Raw was making final preparations for the next day's testimony before the Credentials Committee. Joe, they've screwed you. My God, already? Convention organizers had scheduled the meeting in a room too small to accommodate the television cameras that were so essential to our planning. We were making our case to the nation just as much as to the committee. Raw prevailed, and the meeting took place in a ballroom large enough to accommodate cameras from all the major networks. We only have an hour. He was a Washington insider and a member of the Credentials Committee in his own right. His opening statement established our attack on the regular Mississippi delegation. To tell you a story of tragedy and terror in Mississippi, I watched from a room down the hall as Raw called a series of witnesses, including Aaron Henry and Reverend Ed King, whose testimony appealed to the moral consciousness of the committee members. But one testimony shook the nation. Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hammer. I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Rouville, Mississippi, Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Stennis. It was the 31st of August, 1962, 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by a policeman, highway patrolman, and they only allowed 2 of us to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Ruleville, we was held up by the city police and the state highway patrolman and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged with driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Ruleville. Reverend Jeff Sunny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and a sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children, who told me that the plantation owner was angry because I'd gone down to try to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I tried to register. But before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, "Franny Lou, did Pap tell you what I said?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Well, I mean that." He said, "If you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave. Then if you go down and withdraw, you still might have to go, because we're not ready for that in Mississippi." I addressed him and said, "I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself." I had to leave that same night. That night, 16 bullets were fired into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Tucker for me. That same night, 2 girls were shot in Ruleville. Also, Mr. Joe McDonald's house was shot at. And June 9th, 1963, I had attended a voter registration workshop and was returning back to Mississippi. 10 of us were traveling by the Continental Railway's bus. When we got to Winona, Mississippi, which is Montgomery County, 4 people got off the bus to use the restaurant, and 2 went to the washroom. The 4 people who had gone in to use the restaurant was ordered out. During this time, I was on the bus, but when I looked through the window and saw they had rushed out, I got off the bus to see what happened. And one of the ladies said it was the state highway patrolman and chief of police ordered us out. "God damn it, are you watching this?" "Yes, sir." I got back on the bus, and one of the persons who'd used the washroom got back on too. And as soon as I was seated, I saw when they began to put the 5 people in a highway patrolman's car. "We've got to do something." I stepped off the bus to see what was happening. Somebody screamed from the car that the 5 workers was in and said, "Get that one there." "What should we do, sir?" When the man told me I was under arrest and I went to get in the car, he kicked me. "We've got to get that woman off the television." I was carried to the county jail and put in the booking room. After I was placed in the cell, I began to hear sounds of licks and screams. I could hear the sounds of licks and horrible screams. And I could hear somebody say, "Can you say yes, sir? Can you say yes, sir?" And they would say other horrible names. And she would say, "Yes, I can say yes, sir." "So, well, say it. Call a press conference." She said, "I don't know you well enough." "What should I say the press conference is about, sir?" They beat her I don't know how long. And after a while, she began to pray and ask God to have mercy on those people. And it wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. Well, figure it out. One of these men was a state highway patrolman, and he asked where I was from. I told him Ruleville. He said, "We're going to check on this." They left my cell, and it wasn't too long before they came back. He said, "You're from Ruleville, all right," and he used a curse word. And he said, "We're going to make you wish you was dead." I was carried into another cell where they had 2 Negro prisoners. The state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro to take the blackjack. The first Negro prisoner ordered me, by orders of the state highway patrolman, for me to lay down on a bunk bed on my face. I laid down on my face, and the first Negro began to beat until he was exhausted. I was holding my hands behind me on my left side because I suffered from polio when I was 6 years old. After the first Negro beat until he was exhausted, the state highway patrolman ordered the second Negro to take the blackjack. The second Negro began to beat and I began to work my feet, and the state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro who'd beaten me to sit on my feet. I began to scream, and one white man got up and began to beat me in my head and tell me to hush. One white man, my dress had worked up high, he walked over and pulled my dress. I pulled my dress down, and he pulled my dress back up. We will return to the scene in Atlantic City, but now we switch to the White House. On this day, 9 months ago, at very nearly the same hour in the afternoon, the duties of this office were thrust upon me by a terrible moment in national history. All of this was on account of we want to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off the hooks because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America? Thank you. Next, Ra called Mickey Schwerner's widow, Rita, to testify. Then James Farmer, followed by Roy Wilkins. Ra intended his witnesses to represent the broad coalition. Black and white, women and men gathered to support the Freedom Party. Finally, Ra called his last witness, Dr. King. If you value your party, if you value your country, if you value the democratic process, then you must recognize the Freedom Party delegation. For it is in these saints, in ordinary life, that the true spirit of democracy finds its most profound and abiding expression. For all the disenfranchised millions of this earth, whether they be in Mississippi or Alabama, behind the Iron Curtain, floundering in the mire of South African apartheid, or freedom-seeking persons in Cuba who have now gone 3 years without an election. Recognition of the Freedom Party would say to them that somewhere in the world is a nation that cares about justice. After their testimony, the delegates went back to their hotel, where they learned that President Johnson had preempted Mrs. Hammer's testimony with a trumped-up press conference. They were incensed. Hey, look! But President Johnson's gambit backfired. Networks that cut away to cover the press conference at the White House made up for it by leading their evening news broadcast with Mrs. Hammer's testimony. That's why I like that song. Go tell it on the mountain. I feel like I'm talking to the world. The president could feel the South slipping away. The thing's out of hand now. To be perfectly frank, the party in Mississippi nearly endorsed Goldwater already. Most of our delegates don't even want to go to Atlantic City. Johnson was backed into a corner, but he wasn't afraid of using hardball politics to fight his way out. The next day, the Credentials Committee vote was postponed, and Johnson anointed an emergency subcommittee to create a proposal to address the Mississippi situation. We later learned that President Johnson's men were using FBI wiretaps on the MFDP office, as well as Dr. King's and Bayard Rustin's hotel rooms, to do anything in their power to influence the outcome. As rumors spread about a possible offer, we took up a picket outside the convention. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. became clear that Johnson had directed Senator Hubert Humphrey to force a compromise. Humphrey had voted for the Civil Rights Act and was seen as a sympathetic to the cause. "You're a good man, Senator Humphrey." Humphrey pled his case with Freedom Party delegates, even indicating that his chances of being added to the Johnson ticket hinged on a solution. "I've been praying about you, and I've been thinking about you, and you're a good man. Trouble is, you're afraid to do what you know is right. But I've been a long-time supporter of civil rights. I believe I'm going to pray for you." Meanwhile, Johnson's people were working back channels, twisting arms and calling in favors to erode our support on the Credentials Committee. If we couldn't get our 11 committee members, we'd never get the chance to try for 8 seats or full recognition. Finally, a meeting was called to discuss a proposal. As we gathered, rumors swirled that a fix had been accepted, undercutting the MFDP's position from the outset. It was take it or leave it. The committee proposed to ban segregated delegations in the future. But for this year, they would honor the regular Mississippi delegates as long as they promised to support Johnson. Only 2 MFDP delegates would be recognized, with special at-large seats, while the other 66 would be non-voting guests. The room was split. We should be satisfied with this. 2 seats is a victory. We didn't come all the way here for no 2 seats. But this is a victory. The party will have seats at the convention. Having Humphrey as VP is a win for civil rights. When they won't even let us represent Mississippi, we came to bring our morality to politics, not politics to our morality. We have shed too much blood. We've come too far to back down now. The SNCC contingent did not push our point of view on the MFDP delegates. We stated our thoughts about the pros and cons and then stepped back and let people like Fannie Lou Hamer, Victoria Gray, Anita Blackwell, E.W. Steptoe, James Travis, Annie Devine, and so many others speak for themselves and ultimately decide for themselves. When the vote was taken, all 68 MFDP delegates unanimously rejected the proposal. "You people have put your point across. Roy, you don't know anything. You're ignorant. You don't know anything about politics. I've been in the business for over 20 years. You people have put your point across. Now why don't you pack up and go home?" I was proud of them. If there's one thing I've believed my entire life, it's taking a stand when it's time to take a stand. By that time, most of the regular Mississippi delegates had packed up and gone home. So the MFDP delegates staged a sit-in on the convention floor. But the protest was cut short. The next night, August 26th, the delegation again took to the floor, watching silently as Lyndon Johnson was nominated for president by acclamation. Rather than try to remove the Freedom Party delegation, convention organizers simply removed the chairs. To me, the 1964 Democratic Convention was the turning point in the movement. We had played by the rules. We did everything that was necessary. But when we arrived at the doorstep, we found the door slammed in our face. What's so tragic is that Johnson didn't have to do what he did. He still won re-election in a landslide, and he still lost the South. When the dust settled, many white liberals were seen as villains, and you heard those who urged compromise called double-crosser or Uncle Tom. Lingering feelings of cynicism, mistrust of government, and deep resentment of white liberals would cast shadows over Southern politics for decades to come. I was devastated. I felt so naive. I was never shaken in my belief in a multiracial society. But for the first time, I was surrounded by friends and colleagues who felt different. Those who once fought passionately to incorporate whites, to create a truly interracial movement, were now set adrift.